The sun blazed mercilessly over the cracked Arizona dirt as Tobias Crow stared at the last tepid puddle in his wooden bucket. 7 tribes were expected at his doorstep before dusk, but he couldn't shake the premonition that his next decision would define not only his fate, but the future of this parched land. His calloused hands, gnarled with years of toil, tightened around the bucket. 3 sun-scorched days without rain. His cattle were carcasses baking under the merciless sky, his crops a brittle mockery of sustenance, and his water well had sighed its last breath that very morning. The bank notice, crumpled tighter than his resolve in his pocket, threatened him with foreclosure in 12 agonizing days, erasing the legacy he and his late wife Sarah had bled sweat and tears to build. Tobias wiped the stinging grit from his brow and trudged toward his ravaged vegetable garden, a desperate hope flickering that he might salvage a handful of tomato plants with what remained of his precious water. But as he rounded the corner of his small, sun-bleached cabin, a tableau unfolded that stopped him dead in his tracks. A man lay face down near his dilapidated fence, a dark stain blossoming beneath a vicious gash in his shoulder. Long obsidian hair matted with the grime of the desert, threadbare clothing ripped and stained with what looked like dried blood. A warrior, judging by the muscular build and the ornate yet lethal knife clutched instinctively in his unconscious hand. Tobias's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Apaches meant trouble, a harsh truth etched into the collective memory of the territory. His neighbors had cautioned him against straying too far from the relative safety of town, whispering fearful tales of raids and the sudden, brutal violence that could erupt from the desert's simmering tensions. This man could be a harbinger of devastation. This man could bring a storm of retribution down upon his weary homestead. But then Tobias noticed something that pierced through his fear, tugging at a forgotten chord of empathy. The stranger's lips were cracked and bleeding, a testament to the savage thirst that gripped the land. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps, each breath a monumental effort. The blood on his shoulder had begun to congeal, but the unrelenting sun would soon breed infection. Tobias glanced down at his paltry bucket of water, each drop representing a chance to resurrect something, anything from the jaws of this devastating drought. His own precarious survival hung precariously in the balance. The Apache warrior stirred fitfully, a guttural groan escaping his parched throat. His eyelids flickered open, revealing eyes that burned with a feverish intensity, meeting Tobias's gaze with a fleeting mixture of pain and profound weariness before succumbing to the darkness once more. Tobias knew what his neighbors, hardened by the unforgiving land and the constant threat of conflict, would advise, what any so-called sensible man would undoubtedly do: abandon the Apache to his inevitable fate and safeguard what little water remained for his own desperate survival. But something resonated deeper within Tobias's soul as he witnessed the stranger's agonizing struggle for each shallow breath. Perhaps it was the echo of Sarah's gentle voice, a constant reminder that mercy, though often difficult, was never truly wasted. Perhaps it was the stark realization that this man, stripped bare by circumstance, was just another human being, suffering under the same merciless sun, vulnerable to the same fundamental needs. Without another moment's hesitation, Tobias knelt beside the wounded Apache, his joints protesting with age and weariness, and gently cradled the man's head in his weathered hands. He carefully tilted the rim of the bucket to the warrior's parched lips, allowing the precious water to trickle slowly, a lifeline in a sea of desperation. The stranger's eyes widened imperceptibly as the cool liquid touched his cracked tongue, and he drank with a frantic urgency, a primal need overwhelming all else. Tobias didn't withdraw the bucket until every last drop was gone, leaving the wood bone dry. What Tobias didn't know was that he had just spared the life of Ayana, the nephew of Chief Running Bear, a formidable war leader who commanded the most powerful Apache confederation in the territory. By the following morning, his humble ranch would be encircled by warriors, their faces grim, their hands gripping weapons, but also carrying a bounty of gold, enough to obliterate his debts and transform his impoverished existence beyond his wildest dreams. But before that transformation could begin, this wounded man held a crucial piece of information, a secret he needed to share, about the 7 tribes riding toward them at that very moment, a gathering that held the potential for either salvation or utter annihilation. The Apache warrior, his strength slowly returning with each stolen breath, struggled to sit upright, his dark eyes boring into Tobias with an intensity that made the rancher's skin crawl. Here he was, unarmed and practically defenseless, having surrendered his last drop of water to a man who, just hours ago, could have ended his life without a second thought. The stranger spoke in halting English, his voice a gravelly whisper, yet strangely steady. You give water. Why?" His hand moved instinctively toward the intricately carved knife at his belt. Not as a threat, but as if reassuring himself it was still there, a symbol of his warrior identity. Tobias instinctively backed away slightly, acutely aware of his isolation. His nearest neighbor lived a grueling 5 miles distant. No one would hear his desperate cries. "You were dying," he stated simply, attempting to mask the tremor in his voice. The warrior's eyes narrowed, as if attempting to discern some hidden motive behind Tobias's actions. "White man never help Apache, always shoot first." He cautiously tested his wounded shoulder, wincing in pain but managing to rotate it slightly. Maybe I'm different." Tobias's mouth felt as dry as the parched earth surrounding them. The irony was almost unbearable. He'd sacrificed his precious water to save a man who might very well decide to take his life without remorse. But instead of reaching for his weapon, the Apache performed an action that defied Tobias's expectations. He reached into a worn leather pouch, secured tightly to his belt, and carefully extracted a small object, meticulously wrapped in tanned animal hide. His movements were deliberate, almost reverential, as if performing a sacred rite. "My name is Ayana, nephew of Chief Running Bear," the warrior announced, his English far more fluent than he had initially revealed. "You saved my life. Apache law demands payment." Tobias felt a chilling premonition grip him, a cold dread that contrasted sharply with the oppressive heat. Payment from Apaches could be interpreted in countless ways, each more terrifying than the last. It could signify that they would simply depart, leaving him untouched. Or it could mean they would return, their numbers multiplied tenfold, to test the mettle of this strange white man who had shown an unexpected act of mercy. Ayana slowly unwrapped the object in his hand, revealing a meticulously crafted piece of turquoise, skillfully carved into the majestic form of an eagle. "This is sacred. It marks you as friend to the 7 tribes." He extended it toward Tobias, who hesitated for only a moment before reaching out and accepting the offering. The instant the cool, smooth turquoise touched Tobias's palm, Ayana's expression underwent a radical transformation. His eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of shock, then fear, then an overwhelming sense of urgency. "You not understand," Ayana said, struggling to his feet despite the obvious agony radiating from his wounded shoulder. "The 7 tribes. They already come. My uncle sent warriors to find me when I not return." He scanned the horizon, squinting against the relentless glare of the sun. "They think you capture me. Kill me." Tobias felt his stomach plummet, a sickening lurch of dread. "How many warriors? Maybe 50, maybe more." Ayana gripped Tobias's arm with surprising strength, his fingers digging into the rancher's flesh. "They see me wounded on your land. They think you enemy. They come to take revenge." The sacred piece of turquoise suddenly felt like a burning ember in Tobias's hand, a symbol of impending doom rather than protection. He glanced from the intricately carved stone to Ayana's worried face, desperately attempting to process the rapidly unfolding catastrophe. "But I helped you," Tobias stammered, his voice laced with desperation. "I gave you water. I saved your life." Ayana nodded grimly, his eyes reflecting a profound sense of regret. "I know this. You know this. But my uncle, he see only wounded nephew near white man's home. He think you try to kill me, leave me to die as warning to other tribes." The sound of distant thunder echoed across the desolate landscape, but the sky above remained a cloudless expanse of burning blue. Both men instinctively turned toward the horizon, where a swirling dust cloud was beginning to coalesce, a tangible manifestation of the impending storm. Ayana's face paled beneath his bronze skin. They come now. Maybe 1 hour, maybe less. He fixed Tobias with a gaze that was a mixture of gratitude and desperation. The sacred eagle. It protect you if they believe me. But if they think I lie to save my own life. He trailed off, the unspoken conclusion hanging heavily in the air. Tobias could easily imagine the brutal fate that awaited a lone rancher at the hands of 50 Apache warriors, convinced that he had attempted to murder their chief's nephew. But as the dust cloud grew larger, more menacing on the horizon, Ayana revealed a revelation that would irrevocably alter the course of events, transforming a simple rescue into a perilous dance on the precipice of war. Ayana gripped Tobias's shoulder with desperate urgency. There is something else. Something you must know before they arrive. His voice dropped to a hushed, urgent whisper, laced with a palpable fear. I was not alone when I was wounded. I carry something that will make this much worse. Tobias felt his blood turn to ice, a creeping paralysis spreading through his limbs. What do you mean? 3 days ago, my uncle sent me to deliver message to other tribal leaders. 7 tribes forming alliance against Army Fort 20 miles north. They planned to drive soldiers away for good. Ayana's eyes darted nervously toward the approaching dust cloud, the symbol of their dwindling time. I carry sacred war tokens from each chief. Proof of alliance. The rancher stared at him in horror, his mind reeling from the implications. You're telling me you have evidence of a tribal war alliance, and they're going to find it here? Worse. Ayana staggered toward a jumble of rocks near Tobias's dilapidated fence. Yesterday, soldiers ambushed me. They want the tokens, want to know about alliance. I escape, but barely. I hide tokens before I collapse on your land. Tobias followed him, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible situation. This wasn't merely about saving a wounded man any longer. This was about being thrust into the volatile center of a potential war between the might of the U.S. Army and 7 united Apache tribes. Ayana knelt painfully beside a large boulder, his face contorted in agony, and began moving smaller stones, his movements frantic but deliberate. If my uncle finds tokens missing, he think you steal them. If soldiers find them here, they think you working with Apache against Army. He looked up at Tobias with grim certainty, his eyes reflecting the rancher's own growing despair. Either way, you dead man. From beneath the rocks, Ayana unearthed a leather bundle bound tightly in sacred red cloth. Even without unwrapping it, Tobias could discern that it contained multiple objects, intricately carved bones, fragments of metal, what appeared to be scalps, and other artifacts he didn't want to contemplate. 7 war tokens, Ayana confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. 1 from each tribal chief. Together they mean coordinated attack on Fort Bravery. Hundreds of soldiers will die if this alliance succeeds. Tobias felt the world tilting precariously around him, the implications of Ayana's revelation threatening to overwhelm him. So what do we do? If I give them back to your uncle, I'm helping plan an attack on American soldiers. If I don't, 50 Apache warriors will skin me alive. There is third option, Ayana said quietly, his gaze locking with Tobias's. But you will not like it. Before he could elaborate, the thunder of approaching horses intensified, echoing through the heat-soaked air. Tobias could now distinguish individual riders, their bodies painted with war symbols, their weapons glinting menacingly in the afternoon sun. They rode in a disciplined formation, not the scattered approach of a casual search party, but the purposeful advance of seasoned warriors preparing for battle. They already think you enemy, Ayana said, rewrapping the tokens with desperate speed. They see me wounded. They see you standing over me with these tokens. They will assume you torture me for information, then try to sell secrets to Army. Tobias's mouth went completely dry, his tongue feeling like sandpaper. But that's insane. I'm just a farmer. I don't even own a gun. Apache law is simple, Ayana replied, concealing the bundle back under the rocks. Enemy who captures war chief's nephew and steals sacred token must die slowly, very slowly. The lead rider was now close enough that Tobias could discern his features. war paint in bold red and black stripes. A powerful man with a network of scars etched across his chest and arms, a testament to countless battles. This had to be Chief Running Bear himself, a force of nature riding toward them on a collision course. "Tell me the third option," Tobias pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. Ayanna stood up slowly, testing his wounded shoulder, his face etched with grim determination. "We convince my uncle that you are not enemy, that you are chosen by spirits to help 7 tribes win this war." He met Tobias's gaze directly, his eyes burning with intensity. "But to do that, you must agree to something that will make you traitor to your own people." The war party was now upon them, close enough that Tobias could hear individual war cries, chilling pronouncements of impending violence. 50 mounted Apache warriors, fully armed, painted for battle, riding with relentless purpose toward his small, isolated ranch. And somewhere within that approaching cloud of dust and fury, Chief Running Bear was about to uncover a hidden truth about his nephew's rescue, a revelation that would irrevocably alter the destinies of everyone involved, white and Apache alike. The war party slowed their relentless advance as they neared Tobias's property, forming a wide, ominous circle around the dusty homestead. Chief Running Bear dismounted with a fluid, almost predatory grace, his massive frame casting a long, imposing shadow across the parched ground. His face was a rigid mask of controlled fury as he methodically surveyed the scene before him. His wounded nephew standing warily beside a white rancher, both men radiating an aura of guilt and apprehension. Running Bear unleashed a torrent of rapid-fire Apache toward Ayanna, his voice a sharp, staccato burst of accusations. Tobias couldn't decipher the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A man of immense power demanding immediate answers concerning the well-being of his injured family member. Ayanna responded quickly, his voice laced with a desperate urgency, gesturing toward Tobias and then toward the overturned, empty water bucket lying discarded nearby. But Running Bear's already dark expression only deepened, lines of suspicion etching themselves into his weathered face. He barked another, more pointed question, directing it menacingly toward Tobias. "What's he saying?" Tobias whispered, his voice trembling despite his attempts at composure. "He asks why white man helps Apache. He thinks it trap," Ayanna explained, keeping his voice low and barely audible. "He says white men only show kindness when they want something. He wants to know what you really want." Running Bear approached Tobias slowly, deliberately, his hand casually resting on the handle of a wickedly curved knife sheathed at his belt. The other warriors remained mounted, their bodies coiled with tension, their weapons gleaming ominously in the harsh afternoon sun. The chief's piercing dark eyes scrutinized Tobias from head to toe, taking in his worn, patched clothing, his calloused, work-worn hands, and the desperate, pleading expression etched on his face. When Running Bear spoke again, his English was surprisingly clear and precise, each word carefully measured, like a judge delivering a final, irrevocable sentence. "My nephew tells interesting story. Says you give last water to dying Apache. Says you show mercy when you could show bullets." He paused, circling Tobias like a seasoned predator assessing its prey. "But Apache no believe, no white man tricks. What you really want, farmer?" Tobias's heart hammered against his ribs with such force he was certain everyone in the clearing could hear its frantic rhythm. This was the pivotal moment Ayanna had warned him about, the precipice between survival and agonizing death. If he uttered the wrong phrase, made the wrong gesture, these 50 hardened warriors would transform him into a brutal example, a grim warning to any other white man who dared to cross their path. "I don't want anything," Tobias said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice, a calm defiance rising in the face of overwhelming fear. "Your nephew was dying. I had water, it seemed right." Running Bear abruptly ceased his circling and fixed Tobias with an unwavering stare, his eyes boring into the rancher's soul. "Right?" He spat the word into the dust, a venomous declaration. "White soldiers kill Apache children, think it right. White settlers take Apache land, think it right. White government break every promise, think it right." His voice swelled with decades of accumulated rage, a lifetime of injustice and betrayal. "Now white farmer claims he saved Apache life because it right?" The tension in the air was so thick, so palpable, Tobias found it difficult to breathe. Every warrior in the surrounding circle was intently watching this crucial exchange, awaiting their chief's signal, anticipating the eruption of violence. One wrong word, one ill-advised movement, and this tense standoff would descend into a bloodbath. But then Ayana stepped forward, his face etched with resolve, and spoke a series of words that dramatically shifted the dynamic of the encounter. He carefully extracted the sacred turquoise eagle from his pouch and held it aloft for all to witness, speaking rapidly in Apache, gesturing emphatically between Tobias and the carved stone. Running Bear's eyes widened, his hardened features softening with a flicker of astonishment. Several of the mounted warriors leaned forward in their saddles, murmuring amongst themselves, their expressions reflecting a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. The chief gently took the turquoise eagle from his nephew and examined it meticulously, turning it over and over in his weathered hands. "This is sacred eagle of the water spirits," Running Bear said slowly, his voice now laced with wonder rather than anger. "Ayana says when you touch it, it grow warm. Says spirits recognize you as friend to Apache people." Tobias had no comprehension of what was occurring, but he could undeniably feel the atmosphere of the war party subtly shifting. The inherent hostility was still present, a simmering undercurrent of distrust, but it was now tempered with uncertainty, perhaps even a nascent sense of awe. "But there is problem," Running Bear continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that sent a shiver down Tobias's spine. "Ayana carries something very important. When soldiers attack him, something that proves Apache's strength to White World." His piercing eyes bored into Tobias, an unspoken threat hanging heavily in the air. "If this thing is lost, if you have taken it or soldiers have found it, friendship means nothing." Running Bear gestured to his warriors, and they began dismounting, their movements precise and efficient. "We search your land, white man. If we find what we look for, you live. If we find you have stolen sacred war tokens from Apache people," he drew his knife, the polished steel glinting in the sunlight, and tested its razor edge against his thumb. "You die very slowly, and your screams will warn other white men not to steal from the 7 tribes." But as the warriors began to spread out to commence their search, none of them noticed what Ayana was secretly doing, his movements obscured by the large boulder where the war tokens lay hidden, a desperate gambit that might be their only chance for survival. While the warriors methodically fanned out across Tobias's meager property, their eyes scanning every inch of the landscape, Ayana surreptitiously maneuvered behind the boulder, his movements cautious and deliberate. His wounded shoulder screamed in protest with every movement, but he managed to dislodge several rocks without creating a telltale sound. His plan was a long shot, bordering on reckless, but it represented their only hope of escaping this deadly predicament. Running Bear closely supervised the search, his sharp, hawk-like eyes missing nothing as his men meticulously examined every nook and cranny of the ranch. They ransacked the small cabin, tore apart the dilapidated barn, and even peered into the depths of the dried-up well, their search growing more frantic with each passing moment. Tobias watched in growing terror as they methodically worked their way closer and closer to the boulder, the hiding place of the war tokens, a ticking time bomb that threatened to explode at any moment. "Tell me about soldiers," Running Bear said abruptly, stepping close to Tobias, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Ayana says they ambush him near your land. You see them?" Tobias's throat felt like sandpaper, his voice cracking as he attempted to answer. "No, sir. I've been dealing with the drought. Haven't seen anyone for days." The chief's expression remained unreadable, a mask of carefully concealed emotions. "Strange that soldiers attack so close to white farmers' land. Strange that Apache warrior ends up wounded at your door." His hand drifted back to his knife handle, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes, almost as if he had anticipated this encounter. Before Tobias could formulate a response, one of the warriors called out from near the fence, his voice filled with excitement. He had discovered several drops of dried blood leading from the desert toward the boulder, a clear indication of Ayana's path after the ambush. Running Bear's eyes followed the telltale trail, and Tobias felt his heart plummet, a cold wave of dread washing over him. The chief strode purposefully toward the rocks where Ayana knelt, ostensibly checking his wounded shoulder. But Tobias could see what Running Bear couldn't. The subtle movements of Ayana's hands, the deft way he was unwrapping the war tokens, preparing to separate them. "Move away from rocks, nephew," Running Bear commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Let warriors search properly." Ayana stood slowly, his face contorted in a mask of pain, palming something small and concealed in his good hand. "Uncle, I only rest wounded shoulder. Search where you wish." Two warriors began removing the rocks, working methodically toward the spot where the tokens were concealed, their movements slow and deliberate. Tobias watched in a state of suspended animation, a mixture of fascination and abject terror, as they removed stone after stone, growing closer to the hiding place, the fate of both men hanging precariously in the balance. Then, one of them stopped, his eyes widening in surprise, and called out excitedly. He had uncovered something wrapped in red cloth, the telltale sign of the sacred war tokens. Running Bear rushed over, his face a mask of anticipation, as the warrior carefully pulled out the bundle and handed it to his chief. But when Running Bear unwrapped the bundle, his face registered confusion rather than the anticipated relief. Inside the cloth lay only 4 tokens instead of 7, 4 carved pieces of bone and metal, but not the complete set that would definitively prove the alliance between the 7 tribes. "This is not complete," Running Bear said, his voice laced with a simmering rage. 3 tokens missing, 3 tribes not represented. He turned to Tobias, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "Where are other 3? What you do with them?" Tobias had no idea what to say, his mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. He didn't know which specific tokens were missing, nor did he have any clue where they might be. But before he could stammer out a denial, Ayana interjected, his voice surprisingly calm. "Uncle, maybe soldiers took missing tokens when they ambushed me. Maybe I dropped them during fight." His voice was carefully neutral, his face expressionless, but Tobias caught something in his tone, a subtle emphasis that suggested he was deliberately misleading his uncle, protecting someone at his own peril. Running Bear examined the 4 remaining tokens closely, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "These prove alliance with Mountain Apache, Desert Apache, Wind Apache, and Stone Apache, but missing are tokens from River Apache, Night Apache, and Blood Apache." His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper on the last name, a name that seemed to carry a particular significance. "Without Blood Apache token, alliance is incomplete. War cannot begin." The chief walked slowly back to Tobias, the incomplete bundle clutched in his hand, his eyes filled with a dark, chilling intensity. "Blood Apache, our most fierce fighters. Their token most important. Without it, other tribes will not attack fort." He stopped directly in front of the terrified rancher, his face only inches from Tobias's. "If you have stolen Blood Apache token, you have saved many white soldiers' lives. You have also signed your own death warrant." Tobias opened his mouth to vehemently protest his innocence, but Running Bear raised his hand, silencing him with a gesture of absolute authority. "There is one way to prove you speak truth, one test that will show if spirits truly mark you as friend to Apache people." The chief turned to his warriors and spoke rapidly in Apache, his voice commanding, his words setting into motion a chain of events that would change everything. Several of the warriors looked visibly shocked, exchanging uneasy glances. Some even seemed to argue with him, voicing their objections. But Running Bear's voice cut through their protests with a force that brooked no dissent. "We will take you to Sacred Place," he announced to Tobias, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "If you are truly chosen by spirits, sacred fire will not burn you. If you lie, if you steal from Apache people, flames will consume you slowly." Ayana's face paled, and Tobias realized with growing horror that this so-called test was probably a death sentence, no matter what the outcome. But as the warriors prepared to move out, none of them noticed the 3 missing war tokens that Ayana had secretly pressed into Tobias's hand during their hushed conversation. Tokens that held the power to reveal the most shocking betrayal of all, a betrayal that could plunge the entire territory into chaos. The war party moved with grim purpose toward the sacred place, the air thick with tension, the only sound the rhythmic thud of hooves against the parched earth. Tobias rode double behind one of the warriors, his hands bound tightly, the rough rope biting into his wrists. He could feel the 3 hidden war tokens pressing against his palm, where Ayana had secretly placed them, each carved piece radiating a disturbing heat, as if imbued with a malevolent energy. As they rode, Ayana skillfully maneuvered his horse closer to Tobias, speaking in a hushed whisper that barely carried over the din of the approaching procession. He was about to share a truth that had the power to shatter alliances and ignite a full-scale war. A truth that would forever alter Tobias's perception of the Apache people. "The missing tokens. They are not stolen," Ayana confessed urgently, his voice strained with anxiety. "I separate them on purpose. River Apache token, Night Apache token, Blood Apache token. They prove something my uncle must not know." Tobias stared at him in bewilderment, his mind struggling to comprehend the implications of Ayana's words. "What do you mean?" "Those 3 tribes, they not join alliance to fight army. They join alliance to destroy it." Ayana's voice was filled with a profound sadness, a deep-seated pain that had nothing to do with his wounded shoulder. "Blood Apache chief plans to betray other 4 tribes, let them attack fort first, get slaughtered by soldiers, then Blood Apache take their land." The revelation hit Tobias like a physical blow, the treachery of the Blood Apache chief sending a wave of nausea through him. "You're saying this whole alliance is a trap?" "Yes. River Apache and Night Apache helped Blood Apache because they promised share of conquered territory, but I discovered truth 3 days ago. I was trying to warn my uncle when soldiers attack me." Ayana's eyes were desperate, pleading with Tobias to believe him. "If alliance continues, my people will ride into massacre. Hundreds will die." Tobias could feel the weight of the tokens in his hand, a heavy burden of responsibility settling upon his shoulders. "So, why give these to me? Why not tell your uncle directly?" "Because my uncle's brother is chief of Blood Apache. Family blood runs deeper than tribal loyalty. If I accuse his brother of betrayal without absolute proof, my uncle will execute me for treason." Ayana glanced ahead at Running Bear, who rode stoically at the head of the column, his face an inscrutable mask. "But if White Man reveals betrayal, if Sacred Fire Test proves you chosen by spirits to save Apache people, then my uncle must listen." They crested a low ridge, and Tobias caught his first glimpse of their destination. A natural amphitheater carved into the red rock landscape, its walls rising high above a circular area where the ground was blackened from the ashes of countless fires. Ancient symbols were etched into the stone walls, their meanings lost to time, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with a palpable spiritual energy. Running Bear called a halt, his voice echoing through the natural bowl, and dismounted with a deliberate grace. His warriors formed a tight circle around the sacred fire pit, their faces solemn, their eyes fixed on the center of the clearing, while the chief began the elaborate ritual preparations, gathering wood and kindling with practiced efficiency. The movements were precise and deliberate, passed down through generations, suggesting this ceremony was both ancient and profoundly dangerous. "Sacred fire will reveal truth," Running Bear announced, his voice booming across the canyon as the flames began to lick hungrily at the dry wood, sending tendrils of smoke swirling skyward. "If you are friend to Apache people, fire spirits will protect you. If you are enemy, fire will cleanse your lives with pain." But as the flames grew higher, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls, Ayana whispered a final, crucial piece of information, the key to surviving the ordeal, the secret that would determine whether Tobias lived or died. "When fire test begins, you must throw tokens into flames while speaking names of the 3 betrayer tribe," Ayana hissed urgently, his eyes darting nervously toward Running Bear. "Fire will show my uncle the truth about his brother's betrayal. But if you hesitate, if you fail to speak clearly, fire will kill you before truth can be revealed." Tobias stared at the growing inferno, his heart pounding in his chest. The heat was already intense from 20 feet away. Up close, it would be unbearable, a searing crucible of pain. "How do I know the fire won't kill me anyway?" "You don't," Ayana admitted grimly, his face etched with concern. "But I know this. If you do nothing, alliance will proceed. 4 loyal tribes will attack fort and be destroyed. Blood Apache will claim their territory, and war between Apache and white soldiers will continue for generation. Running Bear approached with a ceremonial staff, its tip adorned with eagle feathers, his face painted with fresh war colors for the ritual, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "Time for test, white man," he boomed, his voice echoing across the canyon. "Step into sacred fire. Let flames judge your heart." As Tobias was led, his hands still bound, toward the blazing fire pit, he felt the 3 hidden tokens burning in his palm, each one a symbol of the immense responsibility he now carried. Everything depended on the next few minutes: his life, the fate of 4 Apache tribes, and the future of peace between his people and theirs. The warriors began chanting in their ancient language, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm as Tobias stepped cautiously to the edge of the fire pit. The heat was so intense it felt like his skin was already blistering, but worse than the physical pain was the gnawing knowledge that he was about to publicly accuse Chief Running Bear's own brother of treachery, a betrayal that could shatter the fragile peace and plunge the territory into a bloody war. If the sacred fire didn't kill him, family loyalty might very well finish the job. But as Tobias steeled himself, preparing to step into the inferno, the distant sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon, growing louder with each passing second. And what he saw riding toward them, emerging from the narrow entrance to the amphitheater, would transform the trial by fire into something far more dangerous, more complex than anyone could have imagined, a moment that would test not only his courage, but his very soul. A new war party thundered into the sacred canyon, their horses ulthered with sweat and foam, their riders grim-faced, their weapons raised in a show of force. At their head rode a massive Apache warrior whose face bore a striking resemblance to Running Bear, his features harsher, his eyes colder. This had to be the Blood Apache chief, Running Bear's own brother, the architect of the treacherous plot Ayana had uncovered. Blood Bear dismounted with a fluid grace, his scarred face splitting into a chilling smile as he surveyed the scene before him, his eyes lingering on Tobias. Behind him rode 20 of his finest warriors, their faces hard and unyielding, along with representatives from the River Apache and Night Apache tribes, their presence a blatant declaration of defiance. The timing of their arrival was too precise, too perfect to be mere coincidence, fueling the growing suspicion that this was not a rescue mission, but a carefully orchestrated maneuver to seize control of the situation. "Brother," Blood Bear called out, his voice carrying across the canyon, laced with a false bonhomie that masked a deeper, more sinister intent. "I see you have found the missing tokens, and the white man who stole them." Running Bear's expression reflected a mixture of confusion and mounting suspicion, his eyes darting between his brother and the bound Tobias. "How did you know we search for tokens? How did you know to find us here?" "Word travels fast among the tribes," Blood Bear replied smoothly, his eyes never leaving Tobias, a predatory glint in their depths. "When Ayana failed to return with Sacred Alliance tokens, we began our own search. We tracked soldier movements, questioned captured scouts." His smile widened, revealing a flash of predatory teeth, his eyes filled with a dangerous amusement. "We discovered very interesting information about this white farmer." A cold dread gripped Tobias's heart, a feeling of impending doom that intensified with each passing word. Blood Bear was too calm, too prepared, his arrival a carefully calculated gambit. This wasn't simply about recovering the tokens, it was about seizing power and silencing anyone who threatened to expose his treachery. "What information?" Running Bear demanded, his voice laced with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he studied his brother's face. Blood Bear gestured to one of his warriors, who brutally dragged a bound and beaten white man from horseback, throwing him unceremoniously to the ground. The prisoner's army uniform was torn and bloodied, his face a mask of bruises, but the sergeant's stripes were still visible on his tattered sleeve. "This soldier was part of patrol that ambushed Ayana," Blood Bear announced, his voice ringing with authority. "Before he died, he told us very interesting story about arrangement with certain rancher, arrangement to steal Apache war tokens and sell them to Army Fort." The accusation hit Tobias like a thunderbolt, a carefully crafted lie that threatened to shatter everything he had fought to protect. Running Bear spun toward Tobias, his face contorted with rage and betrayal, his eyes burning with suspicion. You work with soldiers? You planned this from beginning? No! Tobias protested desperately, his voice filled with panic. That's not true. I never saw any soldier. But Bloodbear wasn't finished, his accusations growing more elaborate, more damning with each passing second. Soldier said Rancher agreed to help Army learn about Apache Alliance. Said Rancher would capture any Apache found on his land, torture them for information about planned attacks. He pointed a finger directly at Tobias, his eyes filled with a malevolent glee. Said if Ayana escaped with tokens, Rancher would gain his trust, then lead him to sacred places where Army could attack tribal leaders. The lies were so elaborate, so perfectly tailored to exploit Running Bear's existing prejudices and fears, that even Tobias found himself momentarily questioning his own memory, wondering if there was some hidden truth he had overlooked. But Ayana stepped forward, his face pale, but his eyes filled with unwavering conviction. "Uncle, this is trick," Ayana said urgently, his voice ringing with truth. "Brother lies to you." The soldier probably told truth about arrangement, but not with this man. Someone else makes deal with Army. Bloodbear's eyes flashed with a dangerous anger, a fleeting glimpse of the ruthlessness that lay beneath his carefully constructed facade. "You accuse me of lying, nephew? You choose white man's word over family blood?" The tension in the canyon ratcheted up to the breaking point, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Two factions of Apache warriors faced each other across the sacred fire, weapons ready, their loyalties divided, their futures uncertain. Running Bear stood frozen between his brother and his nephew, torn between the bonds of family and the growing weight of suspicion, forced to make a decision that would determine the fate of his people. "There is easy way to prove truth," Bloodbear said smoothly, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. "Let white man undergo sacred fire test as planned. If he is innocent, fire will protect him. If he is spy, flames will burn away his lies." But Tobias realized with a growing sense of dread that Bloodbear wanted him to take the test, not to reveal the truth, but because he was confident the flames would kill him before he could reveal the 3 hidden tokens. Without that crucial evidence, Bloodbear's betrayal would remain a secret, and the planned massacre of the 4 loyal tribes would proceed as scheduled, paving the way for his own rise to power. As Running Bear gestured for Tobias to step into the sacred fire, sealing his fate, the rancher made a desperate, split-second decision. Instead of walking passively into the flames, accepting his predetermined doom, he pulled. And so, caught between warring factions, a raging fire, and a web of deceit, Tobias faces an impossible choice. He has to decide whether to trust his gut, risk everything on a desperate gamble, and expose a betrayal that could save lives but also ignite a devastating war. Ultimately, this story reminds us that even in the most desolate landscapes, and amidst the deepest-seated conflicts, one act of kindness, one moment of courage, can ripple outwards, changing the course of history and challenging us to look beyond our prejudices and find common ground. What did you think of this cliffhanger? I'd love to hear your theories about what Tobias should do next. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, questions, or even just your favorite moment from the story. And if you enjoyed this tale of survival, trust, and impossible choices, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting chapter.